Before you listen to this BBC podcast, I'd like to tell you about something else you might enjoy. My name's Alison Hindle, and I commission audio drama and fiction for the BBC. It's a great privilege, because I get to unearth stories people love. You should see the books and scripts covering my floor, from new talent and established writers as well as classics. The BBC has such a rich history of making great audio drama. We're still the largest producer in the world, and the popularity of podcasts means we can share what we do with even more people. So if you like to lose yourself in a gripping audio drama or book, find your next listen on BBC Sounds.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Sutherland, and this is the Scottish Football Podcast, keeping you up to speed with everything you need to know about the national game. It's Thursday, the 22nd of August. Here's what's on the agenda today.
FC Copenhagen is in, I wouldn't say a crisis, but going towards a crisis actually. Being in the Conference League, that's not good enough for FC Copenhagen, but it's a minimum, so they have to qualify.
Can Kilmarnock conquer Copenhagen? We get the lowdown on the illustrious Danes. Also,
it's Calvin Miller in the penalty area, the cut back, and it's there for Dylan. Falkirk goal!
After faltering in Falkirk, against Stephen Naismith's Hearts silenced the doubters in Pilsen, and it's the rumour that's got everybody talking.
Kyogo, Maida wants it, decides to go alone! And what an outstanding goal that is! Kyogo for a hat-trick! With a derby classic here!
Could Kyogo really move to Manchester City?
The Scottish Football Podcast from BBC Sports Scotland.
We are joined today by the former Hearts midfielder Ryan Stevenson. Ryan, you will be cheering on the Jambos this evening, but as a Ayr United hero also, how are you feeling about Kilmarnock on this European adventure, briefly?
Bittersweet. I think, listen, I'm delighted to see that another Scottish team is living a sort of fairy tale, enjoying the journey. I've obviously got a lot of Kilmarnock fans that are friends, unfortunately, but they're having a great time. And I mean, I think it's just great to see. I think it's great for the club. It's great for Ayrshire. It's great for the fans. It's great for the players, and hopefully they can keep going. It's a massive task for them, but I've actually thoroughly enjoyed watching their journey in Europe so far.
Plenty more football conundrums to come with Ryan. We're also going to be hearing from Danish journalist Sebastian Stanbury. But before all of that, let's quickly run through the latest Scottish football headlines. Rangers could play their last Hampden clash this weekend, according to a report in the Daily Record. They say that 3 loads of shipping consignments, delayed and coming from the Far East, have finally arrived. They also quote a Glasgow City Council insider saying, "We're in dialogue about the club playing back at Ibrox on September 21st, and there will be more detailed discussions in the coming weeks." Clubs in Scotland are failing to bring through enough young players, a report by the Scottish FA has said. The governing body says Scottish football is significantly underachieving its potential in youth development compared to countries of a similar size. And Rangers top the SWPL table on goal difference after a huge 9-0 victory over Queen's Park. Celtic maintained their winning start with a 5-1 win over Motherwell. Hibs also made it 3 wins from 3 after hitting Dundee United for 6. We'll get onto the European action shortly, but first up, let's talk about Kyogo. This rumour that he could be a target for Manchester City first emerged yesterday with various reports. The Athletic's Sam Lee broke the story, and I caught up with him yesterday on BBC Radio Scotland. Here's a little bit of what he had to say.
He's definitely a player they like. They're looking for a very specific type of player, actually, one that's not going to expect to be playing every minute because they don't want to upset the balance they have got. But they also want him to be very good. So they've identified this kind of player. They've looked around for a few options, and Kyogo is one of 2, I believe, that they're now kind of deciding between. And now Gundogan is basically sealed and coming back. They're going to motor ahead with it over the next 48 hours. So, yeah, there's a chance it can happen. There is a good chance it could happen.
Huge story, obviously. Ryan, what did you make of it?
I think when you first heard it, you thought, no, this can't be true. I mean, Man City being probably top 1-2 team in the world just now, certainly in Europe. And I think that for him to go from Celtic to Man City would be a massive bit of news. Listen, there's no doubt he's a good player, and there's no doubt that he can finish. And I think that if there is truth in the rumour, then Man City would have done their homework, and they obviously see potential in something that they can work with every day, that they can make the player better. And it would be a player that they would then see that would fit into their system and how they play. So, I mean, I think it's taken everybody aback, the fact that it's, as I said, it's Celtic to Man City. But stranger things have happened, and again, bottom line is he's a very, very good player. So I'm sure that if it does happen, it'd been an amazing move for the player personally. And it would give sort of hope to everyone that the fact that these sort of fairy tale moves can happen.
It would be fascinating to see how Kyogo's movement and style of play would fit into Manchester City's style of play. And there's also the link with Juanma Lillo, one of Pep Guardiola's assistant managers, who was the manager for Kyogo for a time in Japan as well. He was obviously signed by Ange Postecoglou, Ryan. He probably played his best football for Celtic under him as well, to be fair. How do you think Brendan Rodgers would feel about having to let Kyogo go, potentially, if it was to happen?
I think it'd be difficult for the fact that he's a very, very good player. And I think if they lose Matt Riley as well, then it's going to be doubly as bad, because they're two massive, massive players for Celtic. But I think that football, you know that yourself, Jonathan, football's a small world. And it just shows you that somebody that he's worked with before can say something to a manager or a managing director or somebody, and it very, very quickly can happen where, on the opinion of somebody that's in someone else's ear, these moves can happen. But I don't think we can ever get away from the fact that he is a very, very good player. He's scored some really, really good goals for Celtic. He's played really well for Celtic, probably in the main. I know he had a little bit of dip in form last year, but yeah, I think that Man City, if they're going to sign him, they know that they can work with him. They know that he'll be a player who, I think, when you watch all the documentaries about Pep Guardiola and that, it's about taking information and retaining information, and I think he must be a player that can do that. I would love to see it happen. I would love to just see how it works, how he does if he goes down to Man City. So, listen, I actually hope it does work. And as I said, it's an exciting move. I think for everybody. I think especially up in Scottish football, to see somebody to go from Celtic to Man City. As I said, they're one of the biggest clubs in the world just now. So it would be an amazing move.
We will watch with interest. Right, enough speculating. Let's move on to something that is definitely happening. Hearts will be taking on Victoria Pilsen at 6 o'clock tonight in the Czech Republic in the first leg of the Europa League qualifying playoff. For the lowdown on Pilsen, listen back to yesterday's podcast, in which former Hearts goalkeeper Bobby Slamal filled us in on their strengths and weaknesses. Ryan, from a Hearts perspective, just how big is this match tonight?
A lot bigger than it was Saturday morning. I think Hearts indirectly have put a lot of unnecessary pressure on themselves after the performance on Saturday going out the cup. And I think everybody sort of felt, again, in football, you look at every sort of draw, every round, you'll look at one game and you'll think that that's a potential banana skin. And as soon as the draw was made, I thought, I know John McGlynn. John was my manager at Hearts. I know he's meticulous. I knew Falkirk have been flying the last couple of years, doing really, really well. I knew it was going to be a hard game. I think everybody did. And was a surprise when I saw the result? No. And I think that when you look at Kilmarnock enjoying this sort of fairy tale of being in Europe, it is different at Hearts because we've been in it last year and we expect to be third, we expect to be in Europe. But I think just the manner of the Dundee game, the manner of the Falkirk game, I think now going into tonight's game, I think there's massive pressure on the team. And I think that if they don't put in a good performance, it'll be even more pressure. I'll just go straight on to Stevens' back. And I think it was unneeded after Saturday's performance. So it's a massive game for Hearts tonight. Really, really big. Against a team who are really, really good. I mean, this is a team that's in Europe pretty much every year. Drew with Fiorentina last year. So this is a very big, very hard game for Hearts. And one that they have to put in a really good performance in.
I see Stephen Naismith likening it to the Rosenborg match. It'll be interesting to see how Pilsen compare. Of course, I suppose, Ryan, the comfort for Hearts tonight and next week as well is that they do drop into the Conference League if they lose this tie. So how does that work in terms of the dynamic? I guess they've got that consolation prize at the back of their minds.
Yeah, it's a bit of a safety net, I think, that the fact that they're still going to drop down into that. But I think just in general, I think it's more on Saturday. I think it's more on the Dundee game, the performance against Falkirk. I think that's more of the things that the fans are disgruntled with, was just the fact that there was all this tinkering. I don't think we're in the position. I think we can tinker to a certain extent, but I don't think we can mess about up top. I mean, we need Lawrence, and I understand that if he's maybe wanted to rest Lawrence for tonight, but I still think we're in a situation at Hearts where Lawrence has to play every game. If he's fit, or he's 80% fit, he has to play, because we rely so heavily on him to score goals. And hopefully he can play tonight. Hopefully the team can play well. Hopefully they can get a good result. And as rightly as you just said there, if we don't get the right result and we don't get through, then at least we still have another sort of semi-adventure in Europe to go. But I think the performances more than anything need to become a lot better than what they've been the last two performances.
In terms of scoreline tonight, Ryan, what does your head say and what does your heart say?
My head says it's going to be very, very difficult for us. My heart is just hoping that we get a half chance, and again, hopefully it falls to Lawrence and we can take it, or one of the boys who have been scoring. But I think if we can just put in a good performance, the fans will be happy if they see that more than anything, I think. But hopefully if Lawrence gets half a chance, we can nick something.
On to Kilmarnock. They're away at FC Copenhagen for the first leg of their Conference League playoff. To find out more about what sort of opposition the Danes might be, I caught up with Sebastian Stanbury, journalist and podcast host at Mediano. Sebastian, help me figure this one out. FC Copenhagen make it to the last 16 of the Champions League. They're only defeated by Manchester City, and yet they only finished third in the Danish league. What was that all about?
I'm not sure anybody has quite figured out how that happened, because last season was so weird for FC Copenhagen. They were terrific in the European games and qualified from a group, a monster group with Galatasaray and Manchester United and Bayern Munich, and performed very, very well against all of those teams and progressed from the group and did okay against Manchester City. But in the Danish league, they never matched those height, or to say more precisely, they were very uneven in their performance. And then suddenly they were third. That's a dangerous spot to be in Danish football, because then you can only go to the Conference League at max.
This season, Sebastian, FC Copenhagen, 6 wins, 2 draws, just the 1 defeat. It's not a bad record, and looks like quite a pretty daunting task, you'd have to say, for a Kilmarnock side with just 1 win in 7. Is that how it's being seen in Denmark?
Not at all. Not at all. Actually, FC Copenhagen the focus is not that much on Kilmarnock as of yet. I'm sure it will come later this week. But FC Copenhagen is in, I wouldn't say a crisis, but going towards a crisis, actually, because the results on paper have been fine. They've progressed in the European stages, but they were under pressure after only becoming third last season, having a difficult spring season in the Danish league, and they haven't performed well, especially not in the last 2 matches they've played. In Czech Republic against Baník Ostrava in the Conference League, a match which they lost. Then they progressed on penalties. And then they played a very bad game against Viborg, a team who has let in a lot of goals this season in Denmark. And FC Copenhagen were at home and only managed to draw 1-1. And the mood, it's not at the best at the moment in the FC Copenhagen. And they openly admit that themselves. They talk about how the last 2 performances have been quite poor, and they have to step it up, because the match against Kilmarnock is one of the most important matches of the season, because FC Copenhagen sees themselves as a team, as a club that always is a part of the European group stages. Being in the Conference League, that's not good enough for FC Copenhagen, but it's a minimum, so they have to qualify.
That's fascinating to hear. What would you say then are the key weaknesses of this FC Copenhagen side and the key strengths?
I would say that the defense at the moment is actually looking solid. I'd say it's not compared to FC Copenhagen were for many years a team that had defense as the number one priority, and they have some of the best defenses in Danish football history. They are not there at the moment, but they are solid. They're joined for the best defense in the Danish league. Offensively, they are not playing well. They are not creating chances. It's hard to see a pattern of play, and they have many big names who are not performing to the level we know they can play at. Is that because many of them have grown too old? Is that because there's a bit they're changing many players this summer, so perhaps they haven't been able to train as well as they should because so many players have left and so many new players are coming in, and more players seem to be going. I would say there's unrest in FC Copenhagen at the moment, and for them it will probably be better once the transfer window is closed, once the European qualification rounds have been played, but they are in the middle of those now, so they have to perform here as well.
In terms of those players, though, which ones should Kilmarnock be most concerned about? Who are Copenhagen's star men, as you see it?
There are a few players, I would say. I would say Mohamed El Younousi. Many listeners may remember him from British football, have been performing. He doesn't do it every match, but regularly enough, he performs very high level and scores some goals, which puts him a bit above the rest of the players in the Danish league, I'd say. He's very dangerous, suddenly in front of goal. And Ori Oskarsson, the number 9 striker, has performed really well this season. I think he's still only 19, an Icelandic attacker from their own youth ranks, who scored a ton of goals in the youth ranks. And last season and this season, it seems like he's going to keep the number 9 position for himself. And there were rumors about, I think it was Atalanta in Serie A that wanted him, and he's going to be good enough for clubs like that at some point, because when he's on it, he scores goal for fun.
What is the perception, would you say, in Denmark about Kilmarnock? How much knowledge is there? How much expectation is there? I guess most people in Denmark would expect FC Copenhagen to defeat Kilmarnock.
Yeah, I would say so. I would say people at the moment would say that FC Copenhagen are their own worst enemies at the moment. But as the week progresses, there will be more and more podcast and news stories about Kilmarnock, and what I've heard so far is that it's a team that shouldn't be taken for granted, but FC Copenhagen, with their own self-definition, their own perception, think they should be able to beat Kilmarnock and progress to the group stages.
And how do you predict the tie will go?
That's a hard one, because I think FC Copenhagen will be able to win their home game. That was the case against Banek Ostrava, that they won their home game, but then they got in trouble and played very badly in Czech Republic and almost lost it and went out in the last round. And I could see something similarly happen this time, that FC Copenhagen will manage to win 1-0, 2-1, 2-0 or something like that at home, and then they have to defend that in the return game.
Just finally, Sebastian, to change the subject slightly, Danish international Matt O'Reilly, he's the subject of a huge amount of speculation in Scotland at the moment. If he was to leave Celtic, with Brighton seemingly the most likely destination, how significant do you think that would be in terms of his development and international recognition?
I think it will be even bigger. He seems like he's good enough for it. He's been such a big player in the Scottish League, so of course I think he's good enough for it. And we can see that by the clubs being mentioned, not just Brighton, but Atletico Madrid during the summer. He was not selected for the Euros, which raised a lot of eyebrows here in Denmark, because he's been performing so well, even though, I'm sorry, it's just in the Scottish League. That was an argument used
Sebastian?
by many years. He's just playing in the Scottish League. But when he's suddenly being attractive to Atletico Madrid or Brighton, then even more people are wondering, why wasn't he good enough for the Euros? Why isn't he not good enough for the Danish national side? And my feeling is that will change pretty soon. Then he will be a regular in the squad.
Perception is such a huge thing in football, isn't it? And I know celebrated former Danish international international, Thomas Gravesen, was one of those raising eyebrows, wasn't he?
Yeah, definitely. But he's been very critical of the former national team manager, Kasper Hjulmand, who left the position a couple of weeks ago. And one of the reasons was that he didn't include Matt O'Reilly.
Sebastian, thank you very much. We will leave it there. I appreciate your time. Really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
The Scottish Football Podcast from BBC Sport Scotland.
Tough task, Ryan, obviously, for Kilmarnock. You've already said, and it's documented in this podcast, that you've enjoyed aspects of the Kilmarnock fairy tale, which must have stuck in the craw as an Ayr United hero. But here we are. Huge result away at Tromsø last week. Do you think they can do the same again tonight?
Well, I think it's going to be even more difficult a task for them. But I think from a Kilmarnock standpoint, listen, I don't think they'll be going over there to just enjoy the occasion. They'll be going over there to take everything in, to enjoy the experience, obviously. But they'll be going over there to try and get a result. And we all know Derek McInnes. That'll be the thing at the front of his mind will be, can we set up a team that's going to be difficult to play against? Can we set up in a way that we can allow us to get a result? And I mean, stranger things have happened. It'll be very, very difficult for Kilmarnock. But I just think, as I said at the start of the show, I think that the full ride that they've been on has been absolutely brilliant. I think for everyone who's even not been a Kilmarnock fan, I think just watching another Scottish team go in the manner that they have and get through the rounds that they've got through, it's been a breath of fresh air for Scottish football. And I think obviously the St Mirren results as well were great for Scottish football. And hopefully, listen, I actually hope that Kilmarnock can go and do something. As I said, I've got a lot of friends who are Kilmarnock fans who are travelling over to Copenhagen tonight. And it'd be great to see for Scottish football that they could go and get something.
Yeah, we wish Hearts and Kilmarnock well. That's all we've got time for. My thanks to Ryan Stevenson and Sebastian Stanbury. Remember, there's full commentary of Victoria Pilsen versus Hearts and FC Copenhagen versus Kilmarnock online and on BBC Radio Scotland Extra from 5:30 tonight. Also, extensive live coverage on the BBC Sport website and on the BBC Sport app. And of course, the Scottish Football Podcast is with you every weekday morning, bright and early. Make sure you follow or subscribe wherever you listen so you do not miss out. Scottish Football, the gift that keeps on giving. Thanks for listening.
For everything you need to know about your team this season, download the BBC Sport app. All the latest news, goal updates, stats and scores, and insight and analysis. Just select your club to get the biggest stories and best content at your fingertips. What a result. Download the BBC Sport app for everything you need to know about your team this season.